Hi and welcome, guys. We are busy with revision, and today we're going to look at human reproduction. I'm sure you couldn't wait for this section to be done in school. I'm also sure that when you were done with the section, you wondered what you were waiting for all this time, because it was just theory, and more theory. What do you need to know in this section? Firstly, you must be able to draw a diagram to show the role of meiosis and mitosis and fertilization in the human life cycle. So there's three important things here. And we're talking of a simple flow diagram to show how meiosis, mitosis, and fertilization contribute to the human life cycle. And obviously, when you're talking about that, you would talk about the development of sperm and the development of egg, that is spermatogenesis and oogenesis. We move on to the next doable on your side. Describe and draw label diagrams of the structure of the male and female reproductive systems of the human. Guys, now here what do you need to know? You need to know the diagrams of the male reproductive system, the diagrams of the female reproductive systems. You need to be able to label each part clearly, and you need to be able to be conversant with the functions of every single part there. And here, this is linked to the first bullet. Explain the processes involved in gametogenesis, and there obviously we are talking about spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Further, you must describe the processes in ovulation and menstruation. In other words, you must be able to talk of the ovarian and menstrual cycles in detail. Describe the stages involved in the development of a human from conception to birth. Conception is that part where the sperm fuses with the egg. That means when fertilization takes place, conception begins. And that's when, according to most scientists, life of the developing embryo actually develops. A sperm and an egg gives you a diploid zygote, which immediately undergo mitosis to increase in the number of cells and to increase the size of this embryo as it is developing. Further, we must discuss different methods of contraception. Lastly, explain the causes, transmission, symptoms, treatment, and prevention of sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections, STIs as we now call them. And the two that we are looking at are syphilis and gonorrhea. Now, look at the headings that they're giving you there. One is the causes. What causes it? Two, how is it transmitted? How is it spread? Thirdly, how would you know you have this disease? Symptoms. And the treatment, how do we treat it? And before we can get to that, how can we prevent this disease or this infection from affecting us as human beings? We need to know proactively, not only theoretically. It's all very nice to learn the theory of this section. But if you do not apply what you're learning in terms of the content and every other information that you are getting, especially when it comes to this last bullet, because this is something that is plaguing us. And over and above these two simple, syphilis and gonorrhea, I say simple, they're not that simple, but when I say simple, I mention simple in the face of the killer in this country and many other countries, and that is HIV and AIDS. So that also is a sexually transmitted infection. So if we do not educate ourselves in these facets, we're going to be the losers, and the generation to come will be parentless. So keep that in mind as we tackle some of the questions that we're going to do today. Let's get straight into the questions. The first question, question 1, taken from November 2011, paper 2, question 2.3 for your reference. They say study the graph alongside of a menstrual cycle and the influence of different hormones on it. I love this question because this question goes into the depth of the menstrual cycle on one hand and the ovarian cycle on the other hand. They test these two things together alongside each other. Remember, the ovarian cycle is taking place obviously in the ovary, and the menstrual cycle is taking place in the uterus. They're both in a female's body. They are in different parts of the female's body, but they have to be synchronized in such a way that they occur simultaneously, so that the female's reproductive cycle can progress in a coordinated, balanced way forward. So these two cycles are important. This is the most important part in the female part of the reproduction that we study. This is the uterine or the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle, or another name for uterine cycle is the menstrual cycle. Let's look at the questions. They're telling you here the heading, hormonal regulation of the female reproductive cycle. So what are we talking about in simple English? We're talking about how the hormones control the female reproductive cycle, the role of the hormones. And guys, if you know the role of the hormones properly, then this section or this part of this reproduction is a walk in the park, because everything else that we're going to discuss is based on the names of the hormones, where they are secreted, where they act, and what they do there. If you know these things, you know the section. So keep that in mind as we're going along. So they're telling you here, the hormones in the pituitary or the hypophysis, remember there's one gland, either you call it the pituitary gland or the hypophysis, FSH and LH in this case, and they're telling you, here on this side they're talking about days, 0 to 28 days, and they're telling you what's happening to FSH in this time, and they're also telling you what is happening to LH in that time. In the second row, they're talking about the follicle, which is in the ovary, and they're telling you how this follicle grows. And as you can see what's happening, starting there, progressing there, and then degenerating there. In the third row, they're talking of the ovarian hormones. That means the hormones in the ovary. And the two hormones that we are interested here, estrogen and progesterone. Further, we go down. While all that is happening, what is happening to the uterine lining or the endometrium in this time? So can you see what we are discussing here? We're taking a whole lot of things and we're putting them together on one particular graph. You need to read the instructions. You need to go through this graph carefully and then start answering the questions. Now watch what's happening here. 0 to 7 days, going that way. After 7 days, progressively going up that way, up to the 28th day. So that is now the understanding of the graph itself. Let's tackle the questions. The first one says, on which day does ovulation take place? On which day does ovulation take place? Now guys, in this particular question, this was very easy because they gave you pictures. Normally, they do not give you all the pictures. They can give you the levels of the hormones only. Then you'll also have to be able to answer this question. Let's look at what this question is dealing with. Here they're telling you about the growth of the follicle. Look at the follicle, growing, 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 mature follicle, and here something is being released there, on that line there. So your answer is around the 14th day, or day 14. Now let's take the same question without the diagram. And if they gave you the days, look at this one now, and they gave you all the other hormones, they only gave you the hormones. And we won't call it pituitary hormone now, we'll talk about hormones in the reproductive cycle. Then you will look at these hormones, it will be FSH, LH, estrogen and progesterone. you are not worried about 3, you're only worried about 1. And the one that you're going to be worrying about is LH. So when LH peaks there, and if we go down with this diagram, down there, you still come to day 14. So whether you are given the picture or not, if you are just given the hormones, you could still determine the day when ovulation took place. Another way in which they test this particular aspect is giving you temperature. They give you the days in a woman's cycle, and they give you the temperature of this woman over time. You'll notice that around day 14, depending on the cycle of the woman, could be earlier, could be slightly later, depending on her cycle. On day 14, there's a slight increase of about 0.5 or 1 degree in her temperature. And that is when ovulation should have happened. What happens when ovulation does take place, the woman's temperature rises very slightly. But remember that we cannot use that as a very reliable source of information, because the woman's temperature could rise for other reasons than ovulation. For example, she may have a fever or developing an illness where the temperature of the body rises slightly first and then goes into fever. In a fever, obviously the woman's temperature would be not 1 or half a degree more. It would be at least 4 degrees more than that. So 36, 39, 40, 41. Once you're reaching 41, remember 40, 41, we're already at dangerous levels. So we're not talking about temperature as a reliable source, but it can be tested in that way as well. Here they want to know between which days does menstruation take place. Now guys, in this particular question, we must know the difference between menstruation and the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle refers to all the happenings in the uterus in the 28-day cycle. So everything will be included there. And this process of menstruation is also included in this. And what is menstruation? Menstruation refers to that period, mind the pun on period, but that period of time that we are talking about, where the woman is bleeding. Why does she bleed in that time? She's bleeding to release the unfertilized ovum together with the lining of the uterus that developed from the time she stopped bleeding in the last cycle till the end of her cycle, this cycle that she's currently experiencing. So menstruation is a process of releasing the unfertilized egg with the lining of the endometrium accompanied by bleeding. That's what they want to know. When did this take place? Now, again, we need to go to the diagram. The hormones won't tell you this. The follicles won't tell you this. The only thing that can tell you this is this last row here, the thickness of the uterine lining. Very simple. Where is the uterine lining becoming less thick or becoming thinner? And we can see clearly from this graph that between 0 and 7 days, that's what's happening. And there you have it. From the day 7 onwards, it starts going up. In fact, it's slightly before 7, in fact. So they say here, between which day does menstruation take place? So we are safe to say between 0 and 7 days. Because they never ask you specifically on which day. Or say between which days. So you are safe to say that. If they ask you which day did menstruation end, now you must be careful, because you see in a question like this, because it started rising before 7, you cannot say day 7. You have to say around the 6th day, because it ended there before 7. So you must be careful there. But in this one here, we can say 0 to 7 days. State one function of FSH during the menstrual cycle. Now, to understand that, simple, what is FSH? It's called follicle stimulating hormone. Now, asking this question is like asking, what is the color of Napoleon's white horse? It would be, no points for guessing, it would be white, obviously. Napoleon's white horse is white. Now, why do I link the two? This question is asking you, what is one function of the follicle, be with me here, stimulating hormone? Same type of question, isn't it? Follicle stimulating hormone. The function is to stimulate the follicles to develop. In fact, to be more correct, to stimulate one follicle. One follicle to develop, because every month FSH's job is to stimulate one follicle to develop. The two ovaries alternate. In this month it will be the left, the next month it will be the right, and so forth. Sometimes obviously more than one follicle may develop, and in those cases, if they both get fertilized, or if 3 get fertilized, or if 4 get fertilized, or if 6, you get a jackpot lotto, if 6 get fertilized at the same time, you will have sextuplets. No, and that's not a condition. It means you are having children, 6 of them at one time. Question 1.4, describe the functional relationship between progesterone and FSH. The functional relationship between progesterone and FSH. You don't need to go to the graph to see this. I'm just going back there to tell you where they come from. Look at where progesterone is, coming from the ovary, and FSH from the pituitary gland. So you need to know that as well. But they want to know the functional relationship between these two hormones. And what is that? A high level of progesterone inhibits FSH production. Or rather, let's change that slightly. Inhibits the release of FSH. FSH will still be produced, but it will not be released. It's there in the hypophysis. So a level, if progesterone levels are high, then FSH will not be secreted. Now let's understand what's happening here. That means when the one hormone is high, the other one is not secreted. It's simple as that. Why does this happen? Remember, in your studies you have learned that the number of eggs that a female will have in her lifetime, in her whole life, is determined at birth already. The number of eggs that she will have is already determined. It's a predetermined thing. It's not like the sperms in the male. The male is continuously producing sperms throughout his life. So in the case of this, why is this in place? Look at the wonders of creation here. There were no computers when we were created, yet all these mechanisms, these intricate mechanisms, were put into our being. Is this not reason to be thankful? Is this not reason to reflect at all these wonders of creation? Every day we have bounties. Now what is the story here? The story here is very clear, that if an egg has already been released, then the Graafian follicle becomes the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum secretes, let's look at the diagram, let's refer to the diagram here now. When the Graafian follicle ovulates, here's the egg coming out, then this empty body here becomes the corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum secretes progesterone. So it's this guy that's secreting that. So already that means we have an egg in the system. So the purpose of progesterone in this case, in this question by the way, because we're only asking it in relation to FSH, is to stop FSH from being released. Why? What is FSH again? Follicle stimulating hormone. We already got an egg here. We do not want another egg to develop in this time. So therefore, progesterone stops FSH from stimulating another follicle to develop. It's as simple as that. That's what's happening here. So keep that in mind. Okay? Still with that question. Account for the change in the thickness of the endometrial lining between day 14 and day 21. Account for the change. First of all, we must check if there is any change. There's day 14 and there's 21. Look at a couple of things that are happening here. You see these little lines here. Look at those lines. Right? That's one. And at the same time, look at the width here from there to there, and look at the width from there to there. Obviously, you don't need to be a scientist to see that it has become wider or thicker in this case, sorry. Right. They want to know account for the change. First of all, we must say that the endometrium became thicker. Also, we can say that there was an increase in blood supply as well in this time. Now, how do we account for that? We account for that because progesterone, how did this happen? Progesterone stimulates further thickening and vascularization of the endometrium. Vascularization, just a big word for increasing the blood supply. So let's go back again here. Here we have the story here. You'll notice that they didn't ask you from day 7. They only asked you from day 14. Now let's explain what I'm trying to tell you there. From day 7 to day 14, estrogen was already secreted, and estrogen causes the initial thickening of the endometrium. And when ovulation takes place and this guy starts secreting progesterone, then progesterone causes this further thickening and further blood supply of that. You could have given other functions of progesterone as well. You could also talk about progesterone, talking about FSH, but it's not relevant to this question. You could also say progesterone maintains pregnancy, but it's not relevant here. You will not get credit. They want to know about how, account for the change in thickness. Account for the change in thickness. Why and how did this thing become wider or thicker in this case? So that's what you need to answer. Please be careful with that one. Did fertilization take place within the 28-day cycle illustrated in this graph? Now we need to look for clues. Our first clue would be that of progesterone. I just said earlier that progesterone maintains pregnancy. That means if the woman is pregnant, progesterone helps to maintain that pregnancy. So will progesterone levels go down if she's pregnant? No, it cannot be. Progesterone levels have to stay constant in that time because it's maintaining pregnancy. That's the first clue. The second thing is, for progesterone to remain high, the Graafian follicle that became corpus luteum, that corpus luteum must last for a long period of time to secrete progesterone until the placenta is developed. And when the placenta is developed, then the placenta takes over the function of secreting progesterone. So initially, progesterone is secreted by corpus luteum. Thereafter, it is secreted by the placenta. Now let's look at this diagram. Look at the corpus luteum. Before even 28 days, it's already becoming small to degenerate. That's one clue. Second clue, level of progesterone. What's happening to it? It is declining. So our answer then would be no. And there's, I've already discussed, give 2 reasons for your answer to question 1.6. Why are you saying no there? And the first reason was the progesterone levels decrease. And the second reason is that the corpus luteum or luteum degenerates quickly. Another clue you could look for in a diagram like this generally is if they showed you further than the 28th day, that means they went that way, then you would see that this thing is starting to decrease in thickness again. But in this particular diagram, you could not use that because it is not shown in this diagram. So those are the only two reasons you could use in this diagram. I'm hoping you enjoyed going through this question, and I'm hoping that you're following that when you discuss a question like this, you can discuss the whole of the ovarian cycle, you can discuss the whole of the menstrual cycle just by answering this question. We could still go further, another 10 or 15 questions we could ask you just on this particular graph, because there's many you could ask. We haven't touched on estrogen, we haven't touched properly on LH. We could ask much more questions. Obviously, the paper is refined or restricted to asking only a certain amount of questions because of the mark allocation. So in this question, that's what we've done. But I'm hoping that you went through with it with me, so that you're getting all the other stories about corpus luteum, about progesterone and the other functions of it. And I'm sure your minds are now so full of information just with this one question. You are ready for your first break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you used your break profitably and you had a nice sustaining little bite. Let's go to question 2. The diagram below represents a part of the human female reproductive system after copulation. By the way, copulation is the process whereby the male inserts the penis into the female's vagina to deposit sperm. Study the diagram and answer the questions that follow, just so that you know the terminology as we go along. I've given you a heading for the diagram, and there you have the diagram. I'm just going to go slightly down there. Yes, right. Okay, so they've given you the diagram of the female anatomy reproductive system. There's the ovary there and whatever is following there. I'm not going to label all because we're going to answer some questions here. So that's what's happening. And at the same time, they told you copulation took place. So there's some guys, they're moving up that way, and there's something from here moving in the opposite direction. Give labels for parts A, E, and G respectively. Please, in your exams, when you're answering, write down A, E, G. And then next to each, you write the labels. We're going to label on the diagram. It becomes easier. A, they're talking about the structure here, the ovary. E, they're talking of this tube here, this space here, and that would be the fallopian tube. And G, they're talking of this area here, that would be the endometrium. In other words, the lining of the uterus. Here's the uterus wall here, and this is the thickening that is forming there, the endometrium. So we have labeled that one. Name the process that takes place at B. B, there. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that one. We've discussed that just now as well. You can see something is leaving the ovary, and that would be the egg, obviously. So the process is ovulation. When during the menstrual cycle does the process mentioned in question 2.2 take place? Around, we just answered that just now, day 14 in a 28-day cycle. The mark is not given for the 28-day cycle, it's just given for day 14. It's only one mark. I'm including that so that you understand what we are talking about. It will not always happen on day 14, by the way, even in a 28-day cycle, usually. All right? Describe the process represented by D. D, there you can see what's happening there. Now look very carefully what's happening. There's an egg and there's something penetrating the egg there and going inside. Obviously, we have sperm, we have egg, we put them together. The process is known as fertilization. Describe the process, but they don't want you to say it. They want you to describe it. And see how quickly you could get caught here. Lucky I looked at the mark allocation and I went back to the question. It says describe. You could get caught here and you just write fertilization, you can get 1 mark for it. They want you to describe the process. Look at the verb in the question all the time. So what happens here? A sperm comes into contact with an egg. The head of the sperm penetrates the egg and the nucleus, this is the important part here, the nucleus of the sperm fuses with the nucleus of the egg to form a diploid zygote. If you really look at it, that is the most important part there. Of fertilization, that's what happens there. But we're giving some background information to say how it happens as well. You can, if it was a longer question with more marks, then you may have needed to explain that the acrosome secretes hydrolyzing enzyme to make the egg membrane permeable to sperm. This is one of the suitabilities of the sperm. It has an acrosome which secretes the hydrolyzing enzyme to make the egg membrane permeable so it can go through. Permeable means to allow it to pass through. So that's what we are talking about there. So in other words, as they come there, the acrosome will make this area, this membrane here, permeable so that the head of the sperm goes in. By the way, when that happens, you'll notice the tail is staying outside, the tail is discarded. It won't come out here, but it will stay there in that area and it will degenerate in that area there. That's what will happen there. Write down the number of chromosomes that would be present in the nucleus of the following. Cell C, that's not the network we're talking about. We're talking about a cell, and this cell is labeled as C. What is the chromosome number there? It's an egg. So an egg is haploid. You'll write haploid normally, but what did they ask you for? Write down the number of chromosomes. So haploid is not a number. Haploid is a condition where the number of chromosomes is equal to 23 chromosomes, half the chromosome number. So please be careful here. Look at the instruction, number of chromosomes. One cell of F. Where is F? F is there now. Now notice what is F. Fertilization has taken place there. And this is now the developing embryo. When fertilization takes place, it becomes diploid. 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2n. But the number of chromosomes, 46. That is the full complement in our body. This is half in a sperm and in the egg. Cell H. Cell H is a sperm again, and there we've already said that should be 23. Okay, that covers us with that question. We move on. By the way, just before we move away from that, they could also ask you what type of cell division takes place at F. Now F is the embryo. Fertilization has already taken place there. For F to become bigger until it is implanted here, there mitosis must take place. Meiosis is only taking place, it won't take place anywhere here in this cycle here, not here in this diagram. But it will take place for the production of that guy and the production of this guy, the egg and the sperm. For the production, in other words, in the ovary it will take place, meiosis will take place during oogenesis to give you that, and meiosis will take place during spermatogenesis to give you the sperm. Once fertilization takes place, for this diploid zygote here to become an embryo and a fetus eventually, it will be only mitosis, not meiosis. Please understand that. Question 3, study the diagram of the developing fetus below. There you have the developing fetus there. They got some labels. They say label structures A, B, and D. You must know this diagram. A would be the area of contact between the fetus and the mother, or the uterus in this case. So A would be the placenta. B is referring to this little cord that's going from the baby to the placenta, and that would be the umbilical cord. And what else they ask? D, not C, but D. D is this area here. This would be the vagina or the birth canal, but the vagina is the correct label there. Give two functions of the fluid found in C. C is this area here, just immediately around the baby. That would be the amnion, or the amniotic fluid that we're talking about. We want to know functions of it. First of all, it acts as a shock absorber. It regulates temperature. It allows for the distribution of food and waste, and also it allows for easy fetal movement. In other words, the fetus can move freely in fluid. It's easier to move in fluid. By the way, one of the first signs of labor, the onset of labor, is when the amnion breaks, or the amniotic membrane breaks to release this fluid. It's called the breaking of the waters. Name the process by which some of the fluid from C is withdrawn by doctors to test for abnormalities in the fetus. We're talking still about the amniotic fluid, and the process is known as amniocentesis, where they inject the abdomen of the female and they withdraw some fluid here. And this is one of the tests which can tell us whether the baby that's going to be born would have Down syndrome or not. So they can check the chromosome number and other abnormalities from just testing the fluid, especially genetically transferred ones. Describe the function of E during the birth process. E, you can see very clearly, is the muscles of the uterus, the uterine muscles. And the job of that is to contract and relax to push the baby out. And that, guys, brings us to the end of question 3. You notice we went from a graph, we went now to a diagram of the mother's body, and then we went to a diagram of the fetus with its surrounding structures, the amniotic membrane, the chorion, the placenta, the umbilical cord, etc. And we ended with that in terms of asking questions. So one is the graph, Now we looked at the diagram itself. You can also be tested on the male reproductive organs. I'm sure this will earn you another break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm sure you're ready to roll. Let's go straight into the questions. Look at question 4 now. A type of questions that I like. The table shows the results of a survey of different types of contraceptives used in a particular community. And they're showing you there method, the pill, number of people, 4,321, percentage 86.4. IUD, intrauterine device, 157, 3.1. Condom, 320, 6.4. Injections, 112, 2.2. Other, 90, 1.8. So they've given you a table, the number of people in this survey that were using each of these, and they've worked out for you the percentages of each as well. They want to know from you, state a hypothesis for this survey. Obviously, you needed a little bit more information to actually get a hypothesis, but from here we can also derive a hypothesis. And this hypothesis, in this case here, we can hypothesize anything here. We can say most people in the community use the pill for contraception. Now, normally in the exams, this would be given 3 marks. You must have your independent variable and the dependent variable. The use of the pill would be the dependent variable, and the people would be the independent variable. And the relationship between the independent and the dependent, in this case, would be the word most. You have to take a stance. You cannot ask, would more people do this? No. You have to say either more or most or whatever, or less. Even if you said here, least amount of people, it's still correct because it's a hypothesis. They didn't ask you for a fact, they asked you for a hypothesis. A hypothesis is your prediction. And you could have taken any one of these and replaced use the pill. Instead of saying use the pill, you could have said IUD, condom, injections. Any one of the contraceptive methods would be your dependent variable. So please make sure that you know that. Okay, so notice how the mark is allocated as well. How would you get the information recorded in the table shown here? Where would you get this from? How would you get this? Obviously, you would have to have a survey, design a questionnaire, and you would then ask people to go into the community and use the questionnaire and derive information from participants, willing participants in the community, and then come back and collate this information as it is collated in the table in this case here. By the way, I also, while we're on this question, just want to touch on something very quickly, and that is the question on list 4 planning steps that one would take in this investigation. They like to ask this in the exams. So please make sure you're afraid. Remember, there's a difference between planning and carrying out. Asking the people the questions and going to the people, those are what you're going to do. That is how you will carry it out. But planning is when, before you do all of this, what are you going to do? And any function, any task, planning is planning. In a task like this, you must first of all decide on the sample that you're going to use. Where are we going to do this? How many people are we going to interview? So you're going to decide on the area, you're going to decide on the sample size, you're going to decide on the tool that you're going to use to gather this information, and if it is a questionnaire, you'll have to prepare the questionnaire. You will decide on how you're going to record the results. You're going to divide the work among your classmates, who is going to go where or who is going to do what. Can you see, in any event, whether it's a wedding, whether it is a matric farewell, whatever it is, there are planning steps required. And planning is before the event. What are you going to do to make sure that this thing is successful before the event? How are you going to do it? What are you going to write down first? So those are the planning. So be very careful that when they ask you about planning, you don't talk about the conclusion and the results and the observation and the actual carrying it out. You talk about what you're going to do before the whole event. Please be of favor with that as well. Next question says, which of the method or methods represented in a table can be classified as chemical methods? Remember, in contraception, we get chemical and mechanical or physical. Physical or mechanical, in other words, physically or mechanically, we're going to stop the sperm from reaching the egg or fertilizing the egg. Whereas chemical, we're using chemicals to either stop something or the other. Stop the sperm from fertilizing the egg, killing the sperms, stopping ovulation, etc., etc. Let's go back to the table. The pill, IUD, condom, injections, other. Obviously, with other, we can't even look at it because it doesn't tell us what other is. So we're not sure. But from these four, we can strike out IUD because we know it is a physical, mechanical thing that they put into the female's body. And we can strike off condom because that is what the male uses as a physical barrier. So the other two, pill and injections, would be our chemical ones. Pill, the pill, and the injection. I would argue that if you put other, we would have to give you the mark because other could mean any of the other methods. But these are the two physical definite ones that you could see in the table. Which methods represented in the table will prevent the transfer of STDs, or as we call them, STIs? Let's go back. I struck them out, but anyway. The pill, no. IUD, no. Condom, maybe. Injections, no. Other, we don't know. So the only one that we can actually give here for sure is the condom. The IUDs also will not prevent STIs from going on. And in other, again, if you said other, if they use other, then we could have also looked at that as an answer. Draw a pie graph showing the percentage distribution of the different contraceptive methods. Show all your calculations. Now, this is an important question because it's dealing with a skill. The skill of drawing a pie chart. A pie chart is a circle broken up into segments. And a circle, if you know your maths or arithmetic for that matter, has a circumference of 360 degrees. And the pie chart is based on this principle. So first of all, when you go into your life science exam, make sure you have a compass to draw a nice, perfect circle, and you have a protractor to measure angles. Obviously, you need to have a calculator to do some of the calculations that we need to do here. So the first thing that you do when you're drawing a pie chart is to work out the angles. And to work out the angles, you need to know for a start that the circle is 360 degrees. So whenever we're working these percentages, we must work out these percentages of 360 degrees. Let's look at how we would answer this question. So the first up is the calculation. The pill was 86,4. Note very carefully that if in the exams they do not give you the percentage, then you would have to add up all the participants and work out the percentages of each. But here the percentage was given to you. So you go straight from 86,4 times 360 divided by 100, or 360 on your calculator, 360 times 86,4, and you press the percentage button, and the answer there is 311 degrees. The next one is given at 11 degrees. You have to show all these calculations because marks are allocated in a rubric for showing these calculations, and they told you show your calculations. So even if your pie chart is wrong, at least you will get marks for the calculations. So that's the first part you're going to do. After you do that, you're going to use your protractor to divide the circle that you have drawn into different angles. And you will have a label on the top here, pie chart, showing different contraception methods used, and you can say in whichever community. You have to be specific. Notice that we have the community, one variable, and the different contraceptions, another variable, and you're going to get your mark for that. Notice also we draw the angles and we have these things, and what you could do, you can write down in this each segment, for example, the pill, the condom, IUD, injections, other. You put it on there. So you are getting another mark for providing a key, or in this case, you labeled the slices. You label them. Or you can put shades and the rest of it, and you have keys at the bottom, that this one is the pill, and this one here is the condom, etc. I would prefer you to label it in here, and just as a precaution measure as well, sometimes the rubric gives marks for putting the percentage of each slice into it. So put it here as well. This is 86.4%, and the condom is 6.4%, and so on and so forth. You will label each one as you're going along. So in that way, you will get your full marks for drawing a pie chart. Remember, guys, in an exam, you could be asked to draw a pie chart, a bar graph, a line graph, or a histogram. You need to be able to draw all of these graphs and make sure that you know all the methods that you need to do there. Remember also here, before you draw a pie chart, we'll give you another mark for the correct type of graph that you have drawn. So make sure that you know these things when you go into an exam session. It's a skill that you can't forget. We are with question 5, and the simple thing here is match column A with the statements in column B. This is a straightforward matching exercise. But in an exam, you can get either this one, which is 1 mark each, or you can get multiple matching, where they say there's a statement given in column A, and there are 2 items in column B. Say whether it belongs to A only, B only, A and B, or none of A or B. So you got 4 alternatives there. You need to choose that one. You will see they give you 2 marks for each, because there is a finer skill involved in that particular matching. Let's look at this one here. They're giving you in column A uterus, fallopian tube, testis, cervix, and the rest of it. And on this side, they're giving you column B, all the related stories there. Let's do that and take it down. The uterus, it's not the external opening of the vagina. It doesn't release the egg cell during ovulation. Produces the hormone testosterone, not at all. Development of the fetus takes place here. That's more likely. So the uterus is D. We'll come back if there's other alternatives. Fallopian tube, it couldn't be any one of the first 4. Develops into a Graafian follicle, no. Organ enclosed by scrotum, definitely not. That's in a male. Secretes progesterone, no. Provides nutrition for the sperm cells, not at all. Deposits sperm cell, no. Transports egg cell from the ovary to the uterus, yes. That could be the correct one there. We're going to go with J for now. The testis, external opening, no. Produces the hormone testosterone. Yes, that's right. So that would be C. Remember, we can come back to some of them. Cervix, couldn't be the first 4. Secretes progesterone, that one, no. Deposits sperm, no. Transports egg, region of film that separates the vagina and the uterus, that's the correct one. That would be K. Number 5, the ovary. External opening, no. Releases the egg cell during ovulation. Yes, it could be. The ovary could be that one there, B. Releases the egg cell during ovulation. Corpus luteum. Develops into the Graafian follicle, no. Secretes progesterone, yes. So it would be G. Primary follicle. Develops into the Graafian follicle, yes. That would be E. Cells of Sertoli. Now you've got to start thinking about very carefully something here. Cells of Sertoli, external of the vagina, no. Release of egg, no. Produces the hormone testosterone, possibility. Development of fetus, no. Graafian follicle enclosed by scrotum, no. Secretes progesterone, no. Provides nutrition for the sperm cells, no. Deposits sperm cells, no. Transport egg cells, no. Region in the female is not. Produced by the Corpus gland, no. Region where the sperm cells mature before release, no. So now we have to go back to testes and change that answer. Cells of Sertoli will be C. Now testes, we can see there's another answer here. Organ enclosed by the scrotum would be the more correct one for the testes. So that would be F now. Epididymis. And here it says the region where the sperm cells mature before release. I'm going straight to that. That is M. And the penis, that you shouldn't get wrong. External opening of the vagina, definitely not. Egg cell, nothing with the egg. Testosterone, no. That one, no, 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 no. Deposit sperm cells into the female, yes, that would be I. And that would be your answer. By the way, you would write down question 5.1 to 5.10, and next to each you would write D, J, F, K, B, G, E, C, M, I. And that is how you would get your marks in that section. Guys, that brings us to the end of our beautiful revision session on reproduction. I'm hoping you concentrated. I'm hoping you absorbed as much as you could. All the best in your exams.